Welcome to Budget EDH. Today we'll be looking at Ulasht the Hate Seed. Our budget is super tight this time. It's going to be 25 cents per card, and our themes are just going to be very simple: tokens, +1/+1 counters. This is a Gruul deck, and it's all focused around Ulasht the Hate Seed. Ulasht is a 4-mana 0/0 Hellion Hydra, and it'll enter the battlefield with a counter for each other red, and then +1 for each other green. If you have a red-green creature, it's going to count that creature twice. Next, we have some unusual abilities. Remove a counter by paying 1 mana, and then you could deal 1 damage to target creature. Noticeably, you can't do damage to players, but whatever. Dealing 1 damage to target creature is probably not relevant, especially at such an inefficient rate, unless you somehow give Ulasht the Hate Seed Death Touch. And then most likely you're just going to be creating saplings, and then you're going to go super wide. You're going to cast Ulasht the Hate Seed again, and it's going to count all those saplings again, and Ulasht will return each time bigger and better. Welcome to Budget EDH. Today we're going to be looking at Ulasht the Hate Seed. Our budget is going to be 25 cents per card. That's going to be super tight, and we're going to keep our theme simple, just tokens, basically sapling tokens, and then +1/+1 counters on that token or other creatures. Ulasht the Hate Seed is a very unusual card. It's 4 mana 0/0 Hellion, and it's going to get a counter for each red creature except itself, and then each green other green creature. And so if you have another creature that's red and green, it's going to get 2 counters because it's going to count that creature twice. And then it has another ability where you pay 1 generic and then remove a counter from Ulasht. It's going to deal 1 damage to target creature. Ideally, you don't use this ability unless you somehow give Ulasht the Hate Seed Death Touch. Even if Ulasht dies, it's going to look and see that Ulasht had Death Touch right before it left the battlefield. So that will still work even if you remove the last counter from Ulasht. You also have the second ability, which is much more likely. You can remove a counter and get a green sapling, again paying 1 mana. So every time you play Ulasht, you dump all your mana, make a bunch of saplings, and then cast Ulasht again from your command zone. It's going to come back, it's going to count those saplings, and it's going to become even bigger. You can just repeat this at infinite item, but obviously we're going to run out of mana unless we have tons of mana RAM. We're going to go for Farhaven Health, probably the most cheap elf, obviously worse than Wood Elves. Vertilid, again going with our +1/+1 counter theme, and Goblin and Archomancer is going to discount essentially every spell in our deck. Leafkin Druid, we are very easily going to get 4 more creatures, so it's going to tap for double green. Llanowar Elves, just cheap and efficient. Zertar Druid is just a funny way to ping our opponents, otherwise it's not actually that great. Next we have Svella the Ice Shaper. This is kind of our mana ramp and card draw package. You pay 3 mana, tap, make a little icy manalith that will immediately tap for mana, and then eventually you're going to stop doing that, and then you're going to spend 8 mana to look at top 4, and then cast one of them without paying its mana cost. Next, we have our untap package. Again, we're using Stone Seeder Hierophant and Voyaging Satyr. Ideally, they untap lands that tap for 2 or more mana. You put that on a Temple of False God you're untapping, or maybe a bounce land, or a land that has been attached with some auras, and that so that you get extra benefit. Cards like Dawn's Reflection, Fertile Ground, and Weirding Wood. These all force lands to tap for additional mana. None of them really conflict with each other, except of course Grafted Growth, which will put a counter. Probably going to put a counter on Ulasht, but if Ulasht is not out yet, just put it on something else. New Horizons is basically the same thing, and Market Festival is the same thing as Dawn's Reflection. Next, we have some unusual ramp spells with Ordeal of Nylea. Ideally, you use Ordeal on Fertilid. You just immediately crack the Ordeal by sacking it, because it will have 3 or more counters on the creature that is enchanted. You'll get 2 basic lands put on the battlefield tapped. Shiny Impetus is just an unusual card. It's going to be a soft way to remove creatures and keep them off of you. Now, Fires of Invention is one of our key cards. This card is criminally underplayed. Basically, since Ulasht has an activated ability, you're going to pump all of your mana into activated ability and none of the mana into casting actual spells from your hand, because you're going to not even pay mana for them. Fires of Invention, one of the best ramp spells in the game right now. Next, we have our just standard boring Explorer. This is Pilgrimage, Ranger's Path. These all will get us basic lands, with the latter 2 getting us basic forests. Next, we have Search for Tomorrow, Vastly Surge, and Rolling Regrowth. These all just search for lands, put them on the battlefield mostly tapped. Search for Tomorrow will put them onto the battlefield untapped, and Vastly Surge will be a weird overrun spell. It'll basically put 2 counters on each creature you control, but again, that costs 8 mana, so just don't worry about that and cast it for 4 mana. Next, we have Caves of Chaos Adventurer and Garruk's Pack Leader. Garruk's Pack Leader won't work with Saplings unless you somehow make them enter with 2 counters on them. Otherwise, it's just a solid card, 5 mana, 4/4. Whenever another creature enters with 3 or more power, which is most of our creatures, you get to draw a card. Caves of Chaos Adventurer will essentially exile a top card. We can play it until end of turn, and then it will also give us the initiative. Next, we have Timeless Witness, a cheap, efficient way to get cards from our graveyard. Not the cheapest, but hey, we are a creature-based deck, so it's fine. Voice of Many is going to be very frequently drawing you 3 cards. Ideally, you have a bunch of Saplings, and you're very invested in putting a ton of creatures into play. Next, we have Experimental Frenzy. This is just generic good stuff. Draws you tons of cards, and eventually you can blow it up on someone else's turn or combine it with Fires of Invention. Although, now that I think about it, Fires doesn't really combo that well. Open Wild Mysteries is a way to kind of a backup plan in case somebody board wipes you. We have tons of creatures, non-token creatures specifically. So then we're going to get a ton of clues, and then we're going to crack those clues and then make a bunch of humans. Unfortunately, the humans are white, so they won't count for Ulasht, but hopefully that will dig us out of a board wipe. Next, we have Harmonize and Neglect the Future. They're basically the same thing. They're going to draw us 3 cards, and then we're going to pay 4 mana for that. Next, we have Escape to Wild and Inspired Tinkering. These cards are very similar. Escape to Wild is significantly better than Inspired Tinkering, but what can we say? We ran out of 4 mana draw spells. Shamanic Revelation, pretty amazing card in this deck because we will easily get 6 or 7 cards or creatures, and then we're going to draw 6 or 7 cards. We're not going to gain that much life because all of our Saplings are 1/1s, but can't have it all. Next, we have Bag of Tricks. Really good with Fires of Invention. Otherwise, it's just a mana sink. Roll a d8, and then we're going to get a random creature with mana value equal to that result and put it onto the battlefield. Boxing Ring is a very weird card. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it'll fight up to 1 target creature you don't control with the same mana value. So all of our Saplings are going to fight up to 1 target creature with the mana value 0. Pretty unlikely to happen, so otherwise just try to fight your opponent's creatures that are smaller, and then you get a treasure every turn you fight. Speaking of fighting, Guru Rage Beast is a mandatory fight. We actually have to fight, but it's definitely worth the cost. 7 mana 6/6 is going to be bigger than a ton of your opponent's creatures, especially if they are utility. Next, we have our Artifact and or Enchantment Removal Package, Reclamation Sage. Very classic way to blow up artifacts and enchantments. Very direct. No Mage Shepherd. This definitely works better if you have a ton of creatures, ideally Saplings, and then you can go to town. Artifact Mutation will also create Saplings and also only destroy artifacts, but it's instant speed. Next, we have our anti-flying package. We actually have a huge weakness in that we just can't deal with flying creatures. We could chump block ground creatures for days, and if the ground creatures have flying or the flying creatures have trample, we are in trouble. So Cloud Thresher is trying to fix that weakness, and Sandworm Convergence, another cheap and effective card that will also fix that weakness. And speaking of removal, our removal package is just really bad at 25 cents. So we're going to be running Transmogrifying Wand. Ideally, we can proliferate it, but very, very unlikely. Make sure to use this on your turn because you can only activate it as a sorcery. Next, we have some +1/+1 counter theme, Ascendant Acolyte. Hopefully you have Chishiro or Ulasht already on the battlefield, so it'll actually enter with a counter at all. Chishiro will basically make Ulasht get a counter at the beginning of every end step, or as well as any other modified creature. And then Contortionist Troop is a great way at the beginning of every end step. You are going to get a +1 counter on target creature you control, so you can spread around the counters and then contort it to whatever gives you a coven. Next, we have Grim Gully and Ivy Lane Denizen. These two are great ways of creating counters on your other creatures, with Ivy Lane Denizen being kind of retroactively putting counters on target creature. This notably will trigger whenever Ulasht creates Saplings. Same thing with Grim Gully. Imperious Perfect is just a cheap, efficient way of creating an elf token every single turn. Again, with the tokens, Kazando Tuskcaller and Phylath the World Sculptor, will create a token cheap and efficiently, and then Plague Mob Beast will ideally kill those creature tokens and proliferate Ulasht or any other creatures that have counters on them. Next, we have Renata, Call to the Hunt. That's basically the same thing as Grim Gully, except it costs 4 instead of 3. Rampaging Balos, cheap, efficient, and 6 mana 6/6 trample. Basically a staple in all green decks. Somberwald Beastmaster is another token creator, and it will also create our tokens Death Touch. So all of our 1/1 Saplings just jump in value like tenfold because of this card. Speaking of Saberling Spore Mound, another way to get lots of tokens, and Venom Connoisseur is our only way of giving our commander Death Touch. We actually have to have 2 creatures enter the battlefield this turn, but then it will give all of our creatures Death Touch. What the Raid Mother is just a very, very powerful card. Ideally, we're just copying ramp spells, but it will also create creature tokens. Retreat to Kanzandu, pretty weird card, but we're going to put counters on target creature. Ideally, it's Ulasht, so we're going to keep the Sapling train going. Ring of Valkas is a haste enabler, but it also puts a counter on it if it's red. Again, Ulasht is red, so we're going to get a counter, assuming you equip it there. Blighted Woodland, very efficient card. Not really efficient, actually, but hey, it doesn't cost a spell slot. Next, we have some Gruul Dual Lands, the typical Gruul Gilgate and Gruul Turf. Highland Forest is a tutorable forest. Make sure you search for that. And then Kazandi Refuge is a gainland. Next, we have our standard ramp package of these 6 cards. I'm not going to go over them. They're great.